With me to Psalm 95. I appreciate those songs which have been led this morning. They stirred up a lot of memories. I can remember being just, one of the first memories you can remember, growing up, singing "Our God, He is alive." And my grandmother always said, they don't sing the third verse. They're skipping the third verse now. So I'm sure she's very glad that we sing the third verse this morning. Over the last couple weeks, as we find ourselves in this period of year, we find ourselves thinking often and having opportunity to think about the things for which we're thankful. This morning, I'm thankful for all of your presence. I'm thankful to see some of you who are here this morning who haven't had the chance to be here this morning for some time. And I'm also mindful of those who are unable to be here this morning, but who are joining us virtually on Zoom. But we think about thankfulness around this time of year. We think about the things that we've been given. Even our presidents in the United States over the past couple centuries have taken opportunity at this time of year to draw our minds toward Thanksgiving, toward our Creator who's given us all of these things. Although it's been a little while since we've had a president do that, we've had a couple great presidents give great speeches about the thanksgiving that we should have on our hearts toward God. But on the other side of Thanksgiving, we find grumbling. The opposite, the dark side, if you will. The other side. And so that's where we find ourselves this morning in Psalm 95. And I want to start this morning, although there are only 11 verses in this psalm, I want to start at the end. We're going to start at the end, and then we're going to work ourselves back toward the beginning. In Psalm 95, verse 8, the psalmist says, "Do not harden your hearts as at Meribah, as in the day of Massah in the wilderness. When your fathers tested me, they tried me, though they had seen my work. For 40 years I loathed that generation, and said, they are a people who err in their heart, and they do not know my ways. Therefore I swore in my anger, truly they shall not enter into my rest." The psalmist refers to an incident. He says, "Do not harden your hearts as at Meribah," which translated is a place of strife, as in the day of Massah in the wilderness. Massah means temptation. To understand what he's referring to, we've got to go back to the book of Exodus. In Exodus chapter 15, we read the first of 3 chapters of a period of grumblings. Now, right before this, in the first half of chapter 15, we read a song of Moses and Israel in which they are singing praise to God because of his deliverance. It's talking about their deliverance in the Red Sea. They were in slavery in Egypt for 400 years. They were imprisoned. They were in bondage. And God heard their cry and through Moses led them out of slavery. But it wasn't easy. It wasn't just a walk in the park. It required some hard negotiating with Pharaoh, and negotiating is a generous word for it. He didn't want to let them go at all. God had to show him his power 10 times over, demonstrated through the plagues in Egypt. And after each plague, Pharaoh would not let them go. It wasn't until the 10th plague occurred, the death of the firstborn, that Pharaoh said, "Go." And so they left, plundering the Egyptian people as they went, until they got to the Red Sea, and Pharaoh had a change of heart. And he said, "Why have I let these people go?" And the Israelites, being just men, women, and children, just walking along, a very slow-moving herd of turtles, basically, in the desert, were very vulnerable. The Egyptians would have had no trouble demolishing them, throwing them back into slavery and killing all of their fighting-aged men. But God's power was revealed, and that the Red Seas were parted, and that the people walked through the Red Sea on dry ground. And as the Egyptians pursued them in the midst of the sea, the waters closed in and destroyed Pharaoh, the mightiest army in the known world at the time. God's power and provision were demonstrated miraculously. And so the Israelites sang this song. But shortly after, in the same chapter even, in Exodus chapter 15, verse 22, we read that Moses led Israel from the Red Sea, and they went into the wilderness of Shur. And they went 3 days into the wilderness, and they found no water. So when they came to Marah, they could not drink the waters of Marah because they were bitter, and therefore it was named Marah, which means bitterness. So the people grumbled at Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" And Moses cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree, and he threw it into the waters, and the waters became sweet. And he made there for them a statute and regulation, and there he tested them. And he said, "If you will give earnest heed to the voice of the Lord your God, and do what is right in his sight, and give ear to his commandments, and keep his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you which I have put on the Egyptians, for I, the Lord, am your healer." There they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 date palms, and there they camped beside the waters. It says the people grumbled at Moses, and God provided for them, but he felt the need to make a statute, and he told them that he was testing them. He was testing them to see what was in their heart, if they would trust God or not. And as we read further, we really see what this word grumbling means, because we might think, well, this is a natural thing. They needed water. It's right for them to ask God for water. But as we read the next couple chapters, we'll see that it was more than just asking God for water that they did there. In Exodus 15:24, it says the people grumbled. Continue reading in Exodus chapter 16, chapter 2 of this episode. Exodus 16, verses 1 through 3. They set out from Elim, and all the congregation of the sons of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after their departure from the land of Egypt. The whole congregation of the sons of Israel, the whole congregation, grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The sons of Israel said to them, "Would that we had died by the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt, where we sat by the pots of meat, where we ate bread to the full. For you have brought us into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." Grumbling takes a whole lot uglier of a face here, in between Mount Sinai and this place called Elim. Israel's grumbling now looks like an accusation. It isn't just a mild request for water. It's an indictment of God. God didn't just rescue them from Egypt. He brought them to kill them somewhere else. In Exodus chapter 17, the third chapter in this episode, in which Psalm 95 quotes, Exodus chapter 17, verse 1. All the congregation of the sons of Israel journeyed by stages from the wilderness of Sin, according to the command of the Lord, and camped at Rephidim, and there was no water for the people to drink. Therefore the people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water that we may drink." And Moses said, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord?" But the people thirsted there for water, and they grumbled against Moses and said, "Why now have you brought us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" So Moses cried out to the Lord and said, "What shall I do with this people? A little more and they will stone me." And the Lord said to Moses, "Pass before the people and take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand your staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water will come out of it, that the people may drink." And Moses did so in the sight of all the elders of Israel. And he named the place Massah and Meribah, because of the quarrel of the sons of Israel, and because they tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" God gave them the same test 3 times. The test was water? No, the test was more than water. The test is, will you trust God to provide? God has already demonstrated, before any of this test, his desire and his ability to provide. And so when they come to this test, they should already know the answer. But they fail the test once. God provides, gives them a second chance. Will you trust me now? Exact same situation. We need water. Where have we seen this situation before? Just a month or two before, a couple weeks before. But they didn't trust him. Opportunity number 3, will you trust me now? No, they will not trust him now. And we need to take a moment to fully understand the magnitude of what the Israelites have said. Because their trust was illustrated in the ugliness of their words. Their heart was truly revealed. And that they did not just complain, but that they accused and misrepresented God's goodness. Have you ever gone out of your way to give someone a gift? You were thoughtful in this gift. It was difficult to give the gift. Maybe it cost you a great deal, either financially or in the energy required or in the time that was required to give somebody something. And when you give them this gift, they aren't thankful. And they, instead of saying you've given them something good, say that you've given them something bad. It turns your heart over. What was supposed to be a demonstration of your kindness, of your friendship, an extension of your hand, a friendship, now turns sour in your stomach. You become angry for being misrepresented. You tried to do something nice for somebody and it was misconstrued and your intentions were misrepresented. It's one of the worst feelings. Makes you not want to give gifts anymore. This is what I think happened in God's heart when he reached out to these people and delivered them from their slavery and provided for them miraculously and dramatically, and in turn, they accuse God of trying to kill them. What we gain from this narrative is a full, well-rounded view and definition of grumbling and how serious it is. Grumbling is a selfish response. Grumbling reveals the conditional nature of one's favor. Grumbling says, I'll love you, but only as long as you do exactly what I want, when I want it, and how I want it. Grumbling is not love at all. As soon as the circumstances change, as soon as we get slightly uncomfortable, what was previously a feigned gratitude becomes quite ugly and is unmasked as ungrateful grumbling. It's a serious thing. And when we go back to Psalm 95, we realize that this grumbling was the result of the hardness of their heart. Do not harden your hearts as at Meribah, as in the day of Massah in the wilderness. This grumbling was the result of their hardened hearts. A hardened heart is one that is no longer soft to God. It cannot be molded. It cannot be taught or reasoned with. It is calloused and inflexible. And all of this is by choice. A hardened heart chooses to be hardened. A hardened heart is not deluded. It's not psychotic. It's not living in a distant reality. It's not ignorant. It fully understands reality, but actively chooses to reject God. Paul says he acted ignorantly and in unbelief, and he was shown mercy. But then consider the Pharisees. During the episode in which Lazarus is raised from the dead, in the sight of all of the people who witnessed it and knew that he was dead, so much so that when Jesus commanded the stone to be rolled back, they said, "Don't do that. It's going to smell. He's dead." And Lazarus was told to come forth, and he did, wrapped and bound, and Jesus said, "Unbind him." And the Pharisees, acknowledging, fully understanding the reality that God was working through Jesus and was testifying through Jesus, the next words out of their mouth were, "We need to find a way to kill Jesus." They were not deluded. They knew that God spoke through Jesus and worked through Jesus, and they didn't like it. They had a hardened heart. When we read about a hardened heart, and when this phrase is used in the Bible, its circumstances are never good. You don't have a hardened heart and come out looking pretty on the other side. It's used 3 times in the Old Testament. One of them you may know. We've talked about him already, Pharaoh in the land of Egypt. His heart was hardened 10 times. Was Pharaoh deluded? Or did Pharaoh make a conscious choice? Was Pharaoh presented with reality? Pharaoh saw the Lord working with his own eyes 10 times and made a choice to work against God. That's how his heart was hardened. He was not deluded, he chose it. And as a result, Pharaoh's people were plundered, his army was destroyed, and the nation of Egypt was never the same. The next person who it's attributed to is in Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 30. A gentleman by the name of Sihon. Old famous Sihon, right? We all know about Sihon. Not until I used some of my study tools did I realize that Sihon, king of Heshbon, is the second person to whom a hardened heart is attributed. But it makes sense. Remember those nations in the land of Israel. Remember what Rahab said. When she was confronted with the spies of Israel, she said, "We have all heard about the power of God. We have heard about what he did to the land of Egypt." That was just Rahab. Sihon, king of Heshbon, was a Canaanite king. The Israelites asked him, "Just let us pass through. We promise we will stay on the main road. We will trade with your people. This will be mutually beneficial." But he would not let them pass through. Now he knew. Everyone in Israel, and I guess it's not Israel at that point in time, everyone in Canaan knew that God was with these Israelites. But his heart was hardened. He was presented with fact, with knowledge, and he chose to act against God and his people. And as a result, because he would not let the Israelites pass through peacefully, they passed through in war. And his kingdom was utterly defeated. His people were taken away and destroyed. Zedekiah is the third individual to whom a hard heart is attributed in the Bible. By the time we read about Zedekiah, he's the last king, if you will call him a king of Judah. The nation of Judah has been conquered by Babylon. Zedekiah was one of Josiah's youngest sons. Josiah was the last good king. Josiah was such a good king that God said, "I'm still going to destroy the nation, but I won't do it in your lifetime." Josiah's first son, bad king. Second son, worse king. The nation is destroyed. The third son is installed as a puppet king. And he is given control of the nation as a vassal to Babylon. But it says that Zedekiah hardened his heart against the Lord. The Lord had already made a judgment against Judah. It is no longer your kingdom. Just as he told Saul, "I am ripping the kingdom away from you." It was ripped away from them, and Zedekiah could have taken his medicine, acknowledged his submission to Nebuchadnezzar, but he didn't. Instead, he was rebellious against Nebuchadnezzar, and he hardened his heart against the Lord. He did not accept the Lord's judgment. And as a result, Nebuchadnezzar came back, utterly destroyed the city, destroyed the temple, bound Zedekiah, killed his sons in front of his eyes, took his eyes, and in those chains dragged him back to Babylon. The hardness of his heart did not end well for Zedekiah. But the hardness of its heart was still found. All the way until Jesus' time, hardened hearts were still found. People who could have known, who had the facts presented to them, and yet chose to fight against God, knowing full well what they were doing. In John chapter 12, as Jesus has entered the city of Jerusalem for the last time, he laments. He laments. He says in verse 36, "These things Jesus spoke, and he went away and hid himself from them. Though he had performed so many signs before them, they were not believing him. This was to fulfill the word of Isaiah the prophet, which he spoke. 'Lord, who has believed our report? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed?' For this reason they could not believe, for Isaiah said, 'He has blinded their eyes and hardened their hearts, so that they would not see with their eyes and perceive with their hearts, and be converted, and I heal them.' These things Isaiah said because he saw his glory, and he spoke of him. Nevertheless, many, even of the rulers, believed in him, but because of the Pharisees they were not confessing him, for fear that they would be put out of the synagogue, for they loved the approval of men rather than the approval of God." Jesus quotes Isaiah, who prophesies and says that because of the hardness of their hearts, they will not believe. And Jesus gave them every reason to believe. His power was shown, the Lord working through God, working through Jesus and the miracles that he performed. His power was shown, and yet people willfully, with knowledge, worked against Jesus. That's what a hardened heart looks like. And considering Psalm 95, we've got to ask then the question, is grumbling a serious thing? Is this something that God really cares about? I think we have to say that it is. In Psalm 95, God talks about the hardness of their heart, and he says in verse 10, "For 40 years I loathed that generation. And I said, they are a people who err in their heart and do not know my ways, and I swore in my anger, they shall not enter my rest." God takes grumbling very seriously. Because when we grumble, at our core, we are forgetting what God has done and choosing to fight against God. Instead of submitting in our hearts, instead of trusting God, we grumble against him. And he takes it seriously. So what's the solution? What's the solution to our grumbling? The answer is given to us in the beginning of this chapter. The psalmist says, "Oh, come, let us sing for joy to the Lord. Let us shout joyfully to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before his presence with thanksgiving. Let us shout joyfully to him with psalms. For the Lord is a great God, and a great King above all gods, in whose hand are the depths of the earth. The peaks of the mountains are his also. The sea is his, for it was he who made it, and his hands formed the dry land. Come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our God, our Maker. For he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand. Today, if you would hear his voice, do not harden your hearts, as at Meribah, as in the day of Massah in the wilderness, when your fathers tested me, though they tried me, though they had seen my work. And for 40 years I loathed that generation, and I said, they are a people who err in their heart and do not know my ways. Therefore I swore in my anger, truly they shall not enter into my rest." The answer is a remembering of who God is. Who God is. Some things just don't make sense. When I'm problem solving, and everybody approaches problems a different way, and you're looking for a solution to any given problem, the way that my mind works is to automatically rule out the things that I know cannot be the answer, and to simplify it. For any problem, there are 1,000 possibilities, but you can get rid of a good chunk of those just by realizing they're impossible. That's not possible. And so you remove that and now focus on the things that are possible. Focus on the things that you can do. When we're thinking about our existence here on earth, we're thinking about difficult circumstances. This is a difficult world to live in. It's a valley of testing. Even the Lord says, we're here to be tested. Peter says, so that the proof of your faith. Well, proving your faith comes through difficult circumstances. We are in the wilderness, just like the Israelites were the wilderness of our testing. And it is difficult. But when we're trying to navigate through those difficult circumstances and think in our minds, what should I do? How should I think? How can I maneuver through this difficult circumstance? Fighting against the Creator has to be at the top of the list of excluded possibilities. It just doesn't make sense. No matter how much our gut may say, I'm just going to complain about that. I'm going to fight against God. I want to. Okay, you might want to, but it's not going to work. It will never, ever work. You were created by God. You will never fight against Him and win. In Psalm 2, the kings of earth thought maybe if we join forces, all of us together, if we unite against God and take our stand against the Lord and His anointed, maybe then we'll show God. But He who sits in the heavens laughs at them. We cannot fight against God. And so it is never, ever the solution to fight against God, to complain against God, to grumble against God. Put that on the top of the list of solutions that will never, ever work. And so instead, we must acknowledge who God is. Acknowledge that He is Creator and we are created. He has created the mountains. The peaks of the mountains are His. In His hand are the depths of the earth. The sea is His. He made the sea. His hands formed the dry land. But also remember that yes, God is the Creator. But just like the Israelites on the other side of the Red Sea, facing a test in the wilderness, thirsty, needing water, God has proven His power and His desire to provide. If you find yourself in an uncomfortable circumstance this morning, maybe it's something that's been difficult over the last week. Maybe you've been dealing with difficulty for years, your whole life. And it doesn't matter why those difficult circumstances popped up. Maybe it was a bad choice you made, or maybe through no fault of your own. Maybe you're in difficult circumstances this morning. But God has shown you His desire to provide. And we must resist the urge to grumble. Grumbling is for children. And never is that proven so true as when parents take them on vacation. Grumbling is for children. Let us not be children. Let us not grumble against God. Let us grow up. Let us be mature. And in the middle of difficult circumstances, acknowledge God's power and submit to His authority. And God is good. Not only is our Creator, but He is our Redeemer. And He has rescued us from our sins and provided a way for us to be in heaven with Him eternally. He has paid the price for our mistakes in sending us Jesus. And so this morning, if you have not accepted Jesus, I offer the Lord's invitation to do so. The only bridge from this life into eternal life is Jesus. No one comes to the Father except through me, Jesus says. Will you accept Jesus this morning? And if you are already a Christian and you need help, if there's any way that we can help you this morning, if we can pray for you, if there's